the studios of KCRW in Santa Monica and the home of Spider-Man at the Museum of Television Radio here in New York. It's The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell. I'm thrilled to say that my guest today, Sam Raimi, the director of Spider-Man, in addition to Darkman, which should have been a comic and was briefly at Marvel, and the Evil Dead movies, has such an understanding of what makes comics work that the movie has so many great moments that understand how comics have to be shifted and to be turned into a movie, but there is a movie in the comic. And Sam, thanks for being here.
Great pleasure to be on your show, Elvis.
And let's talk about that. I mean, there's such an affection. I can't call it reverence because that would be putting it on a pedestal, and you don't do that. Tell me the first thing you thought about why Spider-Man was a movie.
Well, I think so many filmmakers looked at the comic as a great story of adventure that starred a real human character with problems and conflicts. He was somebody that the audience could identify with, had fantastic villains, and it's really the story of a young boy who learns to become a responsible young man. It's a classic coming-of-age story, The Tale of Spider-Man. So it wasn't anything unique that I saw a great picture in there. I think a lot of, probably every kid in the United States thinks that there's a great movie in Spider-Man. I was just the one lucky enough to be able to direct it.
Well, you know, maybe a lot of kids think it, but not a lot of directors, because I think not a lot of directors get what works about the comic, that what Stan Lee did that was really kind of antithetical to what was being done in comics in 1962 when The Amazing Fantasy 15 first came out. It was a hero rooted in the real world. For one thing, New York City was actually named in the comics instead of being Metropolis or Gotham or Central City or one of those places.
That's true. When they came up with Superman in the, I guess, was it the late 30s?
Yeah.
That was really a non-human alien who had come to the, America. Maybe it was the immigrant story. It's hard to know where it got its roots from, but it was complete wish fulfillment. Not one of us, but some super being, complete wish fulfillment. And then I guess as the war years went on, Batman was developed, a darker edge. You know, his parents were murdered. He was like the wealthy philanthropist that was going to do good. And that's still something that's hard to relate to. And I think what Stan Lee did, he was like the next generation American. He was born here, unlike the other creators of those comics. And he made him one of us. Peter Parker is a kid that can't get the girl. He's broke. He's kind of an outsider at school. This kid comes upon these great powers, and he isn't just a hero. He struggles to do the right thing on a moment-by-moment basis. Whereas, and I'm sure he's got a lot of bad nights, thinking, did I do right? Whereas, think about Superman, he probably never had a bad night in his life laying awake in bed.
Well, the thing that I seem like Stan Lee understood, too, and that you really use in this, and that the DC comics, where Superman and Batman all come from, the teenagers were the sidekicks. And in Spider-Man, the kid was the hero.
That was really a great idea of Stan Lee's. He said, I'll make this hero completely identifiable with the comic book reader. And let him take the journey, let the reader take the journey with young Peter Parker, as opposed to looking at Superman from afar up on a pedestal. You are Spider-Man.
Now, how much of that stuff did you read growing up? I mean, how important were comics to you as a kid?
Well, I grew up in Detroit like you, and I used to go down to 7 in Livernois, K's Lounge, they called it, and for 12 cents you could buy Superman and Batman comics. And I would read them, I would probably read 5 or 6 comics a month. Spread them out on the floor and lay down and on the bed and just dream, looking at those great illustrations and fantastic ideas.
But the idea of the sort of tragic hero of Marvel, but the guy who never gives up and the guy who really has a sense of humor about his work, really lent itself to Bruce Campbell in the Evil Dead movies.
That's true. The movies you mentioned that I've made, Evil Dead, Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, star the goofy hero played by Bruce Campbell, another Detroiter. They're produced by my partner, another Detroiter, Robert Tappert. And I think they are greatly influenced by the comic books. Very graphic visuals and kind of outlandish situations and self-effacing humor. It's a lot of it.
But also a wisecracking humor, too, who is, in addition to being self-effacing, slightly sort of bewildered but never loses his sense of self.
Yeah. He's just a jerk, Bruce Campbell, in the pictures. And he knows it. It's funny because people love it doesn't have a large audience, Evil Dead, but the people that do like it, of the fact that he's such a nincompoop and he is in charge of the movie, so to speak. They've got to identify with an idiot who's got to face these demonic forces. But I've always loved the mix of American technology, the chainsaw versus the supernatural. That's a great battleground for me.
What did you have to do to get the movie? Did you basically essentially audition to get Spider-Man or talk to them? What was that conversation like?
Well, my agent, Josh Donnan, called me one day and said, Columbia Pictures is thinking about making the Spider-Man picture. Are you interested? And I said, absolutely. He said, well, don't get too excited because there's about 16 people that Columbia Pictures would rather work with on this than you. I said, okay, just put my name in as number 17. And then about 6 months later, he called and said, okay, they've only got 8 guys in front of you now. I said, fantastic. Well, can you set me up with a meeting with them so I can make a presentation? He said, sure. So I created a presentation, and the day I went in for my interview, I read in Variety magazine that Columbia Pictures had it down to 5 directors, and I wasn't one of them. And I thought, oh, this is terrible. They probably are sorry they went through this meeting process with me. But anyways, I went to the meeting. I met with Amy Pascal, the chairwoman of Columbia, Avi Arad, the president of Marvel, and John Kelly, Amy's boss. And I made a presentation describing how I saw the movie, how I would approach it visually, what it sounded like, my problems with the existing script, how I wanted to make it a movie about Peter Parker rather than Spider-Man, because that was really the strength of Stan Lee's, Steve Ditko's creation, and really my love of the character over the last 40 years. I left the meeting. I thought it went pretty well. The next day, I read in Variety magazine that Columbia Pictures has it down to 3 directors now, and I wasn't one of them. And I thought, oh, great. Well, that's just as well. I wouldn't know how to make this movie anyways, I told myself. And in fact, I pity the poor guy that gets the job. And that's when the phone rang.
And it was you.
Well, yeah, they said, you got the job.
Well, I guess the important thing here is to never believe anything you read in Variety. But more importantly, I guess, is what you do with the movie is that Steve Ditko's Peter Parker is a skinny teenager. In fact, he looks kind of like an emaciated Eastern European kid on the streets. And you picked, in picking Tobey Maguire, you picked somebody who doesn't fit the profile, who's more archetypal, in fact, as a regular guy than some sort of muscled movie star would be.
Yes, that casting I was really lucky to get Tobey Maguire. At first, the studio.
But you wanted him too, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. After I saw him in Cider House Rules, I just thought he was brilliant. And I don't know anyone who saw him in the movie that didn't think so. He's very powerful in his performances. He's got a great confidence that the audience. He's got a great confidence that the audience is quite intelligent. He knows that he never has to put on a show for them. He simply has to be in a moment, think a thought. He trusts the camera to collect that thought and transmit it, and knows that the audience never needs to be played down to, that they will perceive the thought and be with him in that moment. So he works in a unique and striking way.
There's something conspiratorial about him as an actor, isn't there?
Yes, I think so.
That kind of intimacy involves basically a conspiracy with the audience.
That's a great way to put it. That's what I'll say in my next interview.
But by going after him, and I'm actually thinking when he's in the Ang Lee movie, The Ice Storm, he's sitting there with a copy of the issue of Fantastic Four.
Oh, I heard that. Yeah, I'd love to see the whole picture. I only saw parts of it when I was looking at the cinematographer to consider for another job, but I'd love to see the whole thing. But I loved Ang Lee's Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon.
Yeah, and I guess I wonder, when in thinking about Tobey Maguire, when you mentioned his name to the studio, what was their response?
Well, I think the studio didn't get it at first. They didn't really, and it's only because they didn't doubt Tobey's acting ability, but I think they thought, oh, we're making Spider-Man. That's like a young Superman, right? So I think they were looking for somebody who, starred in action pictures, had that square jaw, handsome thing going, and it just took me to explain to them who the character of Peter Parker was and what the focus of our picture was that was going to make it unique. And once they understood that, they supported me in the choice of Toby.
Was there ever any consideration of making it a period picture? Just because the New York that I really think of, you talked about Stan Lee and Steve Ditko who created the character. That New York doesn't exist so much anymore.
That's true. I never really thought about it as a period piece because Spider-Man has always been in the moment, real, identifiable. I didn't want it to be anything distant from the audience's experience of their own high school or the New York that they know. Because the great strength of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's creation is that he's one of us, and you take this journey with him. So to make it a period piece would be some subtle way of distancing us from it.
And I wonder, too, if you sort of thought of Darkman as being a way of using all your comic book enthusiasms and those things you loved about those characters as well, and when you made that movie. That's
exactly right. I really wanted to make The Shadow, but Universal didn't want to know about me as the director. So I wrote my own version, and that's why it's called Dark Man. That's my metaphor for The Shadow that they wouldn't let me make. Now I'll probably be sued once this comes out. But yeah, it was my version of The Shadow, or those pulpy comic book heroes of the 30s. And I really was influenced, again, by Stan Lee and the Marvel Comics back then.
I guess I wondered, too, when you saw Batman, you thought, gosh, they sort of got it right with that one. And that sort of preempted you from still wanting to do a comic book movie.
Well, yeah, I really enjoyed Batman. My favorite is Richard Donner's Superman picture. That's the movie that I really believe a director and a team of artists captured the brilliance of the comic books and really brought it to life on the big screen. Batman was excellent also, but I never felt limited by seeing those, only inspired, encouraged that it was possible.
Well, it's interesting, too, because I guess I think with A Simple Plan, there's that's something that people wouldn't think of if there is a Sam Raimi movie, is being a Sam Raimi movie. That's about a kind of experience and a kind of suffering that, in the end, it kind of gives itself or lends itself to what you did with Spider-Man.
I learned a lot from A Simple Plan. That's based on the Scott Smith book of the same title, and then he also wrote the screenplay. And I learned a lot about performance from Billy Bob Thornton and Bill Paxton and Bridget Fonda. And I needed everything that I learned on that movie, performance-wise, to be able to make Spider-Man. And I needed everything that I learned on the Evil Dead movies and Darkman to make Spider-Man. It really was a synthesis of performance and special effects and technology. I had to pull out every trick I knew to be able to pull this one off.
In talking to you about this, because what I'm getting is that there's a lot of stillness in A Simple Plan. There's a lot of that tension between those three guys in the rooms, and a lot of Spider-Man too. You're talking about it being about Peter Parker, and a lot of it is about stillness too, even though it's clearly very kinetic. But it's also figuring out a way to get the audience to relate to Peter Parker.
That's right. That stillness is a technique that I employed in Spider-Man. You wouldn't think so. I mean, I'm surprised you said that, but it is true. And I thought in those terms because I didn't want the audience to look at the movie and think, oh, that's a cool shot in Spider-Man. That's a wild visual. Because I didn't want them to be aware of the artifice of the movie. I really wanted Tobey Maguire to pull us into the character and pull us into the story. So I put the camera not in the most exciting place all the time, but I tried to put it in the proper place, in the place where Toby could affect the audience. And likewise, when he became Spider-Man, who was a character that soars with great grace and agility and swoops through the canyons of the city with great speed and excitement, I wanted the camera to capture that also. So at that point, I felt it was proper to have a great deal of movement and thrilling and exciting motion to the film, because I felt that was true to that side of his personality.
We've got to take a break. We'll be back in just a bit with Sam Raimi, director of Spider-Man. It's The Treatment. And we're back. I'm Elvis Mitchell. It's a treatment. My guest is Sam Raimi, who movie you may have heard of, Spider-Man, which opened last week. Sam, in talking about A Simple Plan, you said that you learned something about performance. What specifically did you get out of that in working with those actors that you hadn't really picked up before?
I think I learned that oftentimes, as fine as Scott Smith's screenplay was, things can't be imposed to great effect on the actors. I really believe the actors have to find a truth of the moment, and that's what you have to go with. You've got to explore that and make it real. No matter what the dictates of the story or the screenplay, the structure as a whole, you have to follow what you know is true in the moment. And it's kind of frightening because you know that a particular scene, number 23, has to end as the husband leaves angrily out of the room and there's a breakup, but maybe what motivated them doesn't ring true in the moment. What motivated that anger, what the script told us would make him angry, we can't find on the set. We've got to make it real, and I learned that from the actors. That's where the best drama lies, in following that truth.
Did a lot of that give you the opportunity, too, to maybe pare away some of the dialogue? Because it's a pretty spare movie. There's not a lot of talk in it, and there is in the book.
It did give me that opportunity to work with, in a much more subtle palette, the visuals and the effect that the shot has on the audience or on the moment. I was experimenting with trying to create this claustrophobic feeling in A Simple Plan as the guilt and their misdeed grows heavier and heavier upon their upon the characters who've done this evil thing and keeping this money. And I tried to lose them in the landscape, in greater and greater landscapes, so that it felt like they were overwhelmed with these white fields of snow, as though the situation was overwhelming them, and trying to create claustrophobia in a different way than you might think in vast landscapes. I took a cue from some of the from some Japanese artwork I had seen. These little figures dwarfed in these humongous fields of color in that case, and I felt it was oppressive, and I wanted to try and bring that off with the snow, and I was exploring how long we could sit just looking at a character's face without cutting to help him or to motivate the audience to really get them caught up in the moment and the performance. So it was a great experimentation ground for me. I learned a lot from it.
What's interesting about that movie, too, when you're talking about these huge tableaux, is that there's so much white that after a while, like, this kind of sense of emotional dislocation comes in, and it seems to lend itself to, certainly in Bill Paxton's case, he never really knows where he is.
Yeah, that's so true. I think that he didn't. I agree. That's revealed to him as throughout the course of the picture, that he's lost. I think he thinks he's found, and maybe he is satisfied as the picture begins. But once the possibility of what money can do for him, the idea of the money, enters his brain, he begins to become dissatisfied with his world. And he examines it in a harsh, ugly light and picks it apart. And that's when his world starts to unravel. Things that were formerly acceptable to him suddenly become unacceptable. And his relationship with his wife is strained. She's affected by the greed, and it poisons them. It poisons their relationship and their world, and it's not a pretty picture.
It sounds like you're saying that movie for you ended up being a real turning point.
It was. It was a great turning point for me because I had only tried to thrill the audience before with the visuals and the scares of my horror films and much more obvious trickery and stunts. But in this case, it was a study, an inward study of character and performance and story and theme for the first time. I think I grew a lot just from what I learned from the actors, from what Scott Smith's screenplay told me, and what the movie told me, because it starts to speak to you in a way once you start shooting it. It has its own needs. The moment you start rolling on the first shot, it in some subtle way is asking for the next piece to be done in a particular way. So I listened. I listened on that picture.
And that led to you making your next picture. Basically, it was a real ensemble work, wasn't it?
after Simple Plan, I realized I had my first taste of school, so to speak, acting school, and then I had to go in and get some really intense study on it. So I was fortunate enough to come across Billy Bob Thornton and Tom Epperson's screenplay called The Gift, and that had a really great sense of people and the places they must have known as kids, growing up in this small Arkansas town. And fortunately, I was able to interest Cate Blanchett in taking the lead role in the piece, and so it was time for me to go back to school with a great master teacher this time, Cate Blanchett.
All the things you've been talking about here, what seems to be elemental in the way you make movies is giving the pictures a sense of place.
Well, yeah, the sense of place in The Gift was very important. It was a murder story, but what made it unique were the people that lived in this particular town. A murder story in Los Angeles is one thing where you don't know the guy in the car next to you, but in the small southern town where this movie took place, everyone knows each other's business, and so it has a unique rippling effect on the relationships of the people involved in that particular story, and it's the people that Billy Bob and Tom Epperson knew so well in their screenplay which made it so striking. So combined with his talents for writing and the fact that it was about a small town which he knew so well, it really made it an interesting project for me.
And you give that same sense of place to Spider-Man, too. I mean, we talk about all these other comic book movies. They never seem to take place anywhere. I mean, you know, you've got these big sort of, again, archetypal locations for Superman with the wheat fields of Kansas, sort of, and New York, sort of, but not really. But Spider-Man is very specifically rooted in New York City.
That's right. That, as you mentioned, was Stanley's idea about making him a real person, so no Gotham City or Metropolis. He'll live in Manhattan, and because it's about Peter as a real person that we relate to, I kept that idea, of course. And at this, I was troubled by it too, though, because I knew that if I just shot photography of Manhattan and tried to put this colorful costume character in front of it, the image would not hold him. It would not accept this fanciful figure. So
why do you say that?
Well, New York is so real. And Spider-Man is such a fantasy. If you think of his webbing and his bright colors, his red and his blue, the production designer actually had to come up with a way of presenting New York in a slightly take the edge off reality way, so that it could hold the image of Spider-Man, so that it wouldn't vomit him out. Because there are great, brilliant structures that are unique and fanciful and quite imaginative. Just that there's one in every square block. So we made a whole city of the best of Manhattan, the most magical, fantastic buildings, and we tried to light them usually at like a magic hour when the light was raking them with a golden hue to it. That seemed to hold properly as a background the image of Spider-Man and the Green Goblin. And I'm so glad he came up with that solution, Neil Spisak did, our production designer, because I don't know what it would have done otherwise.
But you ended up losing an important New York structure before the movie came out, didn't you?
Yes, there was a terrible attack on the World Trade Center, and it had been in a lot of the film that we had shot. There was one shot we lost. There was a scene that was shot for the trailer by my second unit director, Dick Buckley. There are these bank robbers in Manhattan. As they make their getaway with the loot in a helicopter, suddenly their helicopter stops in midair inexplicably. And as the camera pulls back, it's revealed that this helicopter is in fact ensnared in a giant spider's web that is strung between the twin towers of the World Trade Center. And when the audience saw that in the theaters in the United States, a tremendous cheer went up. And it was because it heralded the arrival of Spider-Man, this much beloved hero. Now, after the attack on the towers, I didn't think it was appropriate to use the towers in something like this cheer moment, so I did remove that shot. But conversely, I have kept in all the other shots of the Twin Towers that exist in the backgrounds of the film, and one image of the Twin Towers is reflected in Spider-Man's eye. I did that because I didn't want the terrorists to win in any way. I didn't want them to have to remove our our lovely towers.
Well, that moment you talk about in in that trailer, that's such a wonderful moment. It's actually such a sort of a Steve Ditko beat, isn't it?
Yeah, that was really a well-produced trailer. Sony Pictures made that, and I really thought it was dramatic and fun, and I sat in the audience and felt this tremendous whoop go up, and it was like being in a real old-fashioned movie.
Part of it seems one of the great things about having you do this movie is that to get somebody in who sort of understands the comic and doesn't condescend. You talking about the Richard Donner Superman, and that was written by people who really knew and loved Superman. David Newman and Robert Benton, who knew the character backward and forwards, and basically said Superman is really this kind of comic relief schizophrenic who wants the girl to love him for what he's not. And you've got kind of a similar situation happening with Peter Parker, too, who kind of wants his girls to kind of love him for what he is and what he's not.
Yeah, Peter Parker is so in love with Mary Jane Watson, played by Kirsten Dunst, and he's always there for her, accepting her for who she is. She tries to be, she's a very insecure woman as the picture begins, and tries to model herself into different people to satisfy the boyfriend of the moment. She wants to fit their image of who she should be. Peter always knows who she really is and accepts her for who she really is, but she's always chasing something that she thinks is better. And she goes through some growth in the picture in that she realizes that she doesn't have to pretend to be something she's not to be fulfilled. In fact, that way lies misery. She learns to accept herself for who she is, and in fact that there's someone there in the guise of Peter Parker that's always loved her for who she is. And so she comes to terms with herself and is rewarded by the acceptance of Peter's love as the picture concludes.
It's interesting. I'm sorry that you say that, because at the very beginning of the picture, it's Norman Osborn who says that to his son, accept who you are.
That's right. That it is a theme that is reoccurring in Spider-Man, and that is you choose who you will be in this world. And some people are guided by their more selfish instincts. That in the case of Norman Osborn, that's true. He becomes this villain because he works to satisfy himself. He uses his power for his own good, you could say. And Peter Parker grows into someone who learns to push aside his self-interest and use his power for the greater good of others. And hence the Spider-Man logo or motto that's always been in the comic books: with great power comes great responsibility. And that's really what this is the story of.
Well, Sam, I want to thank you for being here, and please come back anytime you like.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
My guest is Sam Raimi. The movie is Spider-Man. Our technical director at KCRW is Mario Diaz. Here at the Museum of Television and Radio in New York, it's Ken Beck. Mary Holdridge produces the program. This and previously archived editions of The Treatment are available at the website. Go to kcrw.com and type in keyword The Treatment. I'm Elvis Mitchell, swinging out of here. See you next time.
Spider-Man, Spider-Man, does whatever a spider can. Spins a web any size, catches thieves just like flies. Look out, here comes the Spider-Man.